A father stood on the steps of the Bexar County Courthouse in San Antonio, Texas. His name was Marcus Alvarez. He had just finished his final custody hearing, a battle he had been fighting for over 2 years. His daughter, 6-year-old Isabella, was waiting for him at his mother's house, unaware that this day would change everything. As Marcus walked to his car, he exhaled deeply. Relief washed over him. For the first time in months, he believed he had a real chance. He had done everything the court had asked, attended parenting classes, undergone evaluations, provided financial support. He was ready to be the father Isabella deserved. Then, the gunfire started. One shot. Then another. Then another. A total of 32 bullets ripped through the morning air. Pedestrians ducked. Some ran for cover. Others froze in place. Tires screeched as drivers slammed on their brakes. A woman screamed. A man shouted for help. Marcus collapsed onto the pavement, his body jerking with every shot. His white dress shirt, the same one he had worn for every court appearance, was now soaked in red. A security camera from across the street captured the entire scene. A black sedan with tinted windows sped away. No hesitation. No panic. Just a calculated, precise execution. Within minutes, law enforcement arrived. Paramedics rushed to Marcus, but it was too late. He was gone. The questions began immediately. Who would want him dead? A violent ex? A jealous rival? A custody battle was one thing, murder was another. Officers canvassed the area. Witnesses spoke of a masked gunman, dressed in black, emerging from an alleyway just as Marcus reached his car. Some claimed they saw 2 figures. Others insisted it was one. The details were hazy, but one thing was certain, this was no random attack. His mother arrived at the scene, her cries piercing through the crowd. She fell to her knees, reaching for him, but an officer held her back. A news crew captured the moment, broadcasting her heartbreak to an audience that would soon demand justice. By noon, the headlines spread. Father executed after custody hearing. San Antonio man gunned down in broad daylight. Who killed Marcus Alvarez? But for those closest to him, the headlines weren't enough. They needed answers. And what they would uncover would send shockwaves through the city. Detectives arrived within the hour, stepping over shattered glass and bullet casings as they surveyed the scene. A pool of blood spread beneath Marcus Alvarez's body, seeping into the cracks of the pavement. The medical examiner quietly noted the entry wounds, his chest, his abdomen, his legs. The sheer number of shots suggested one thing. This was personal. The courthouse security cameras provided the first real lead. The footage showed Marcus leaving the building at exactly 9:42 a.m., his leather briefcase swinging at his side. He glanced at his phone, smiled to himself, and then walked toward the parking lot. A black sedan idled a few yards away. The brake lights flickered. The driver's window rolled down just enough. Then, at 9:44 a.m., the figure stepped out. Black clothing. A hood pulled low. The first shot rang out, striking Marcus in the shoulder. His body twisted from the impact, his briefcase hitting the ground. Then came the second shot. The third. The fourth. He stumbled. The barrage continued. By the time Marcus lay still, the gunman had already disappeared. The black sedan pulled away, taking with it any immediate hope of an arrest. Back at headquarters, detectives combed through Marcus's past. No known gang ties. No criminal record. No history of violence. By all accounts, he was a father who wanted to raise his daughter. A man trying to rebuild his life. But the deeper they looked, the more questions surfaced. They started with the custody battle. His ex, Vanessa Castillo, had fought him every step of the way. Court records painted a bitter struggle, allegations of neglect, counterclaims of manipulation. Marcus had provided evidence to refute every accusation. His attorney argued that Vanessa was creating roadblocks, using every delay tactic possible. The most recent ruling had shifted the case in Marcus's favor. Full custody was within reach. Had that been the final trigger? Detectives knocked on Vanessa's door later that afternoon. She answered in a bathrobe, dark circles under her eyes, a cigarette smoldering between her fingers. When they told her why they had come, she barely reacted. She exhaled slowly, then muttered, "I figured something like this would happen." Her words lingered in the air. They asked where she had been that morning. She said she was home, asleep. Could anyone verify that? She shrugged. Maybe her neighbor had seen her car in the driveway. The detectives exchanged a look. Something about her demeanor felt off. Indifferent. Almost expectant. They pressed her for details about the custody battle. She scoffed, flicking ash into a ceramic dish. "Marcus was making my life hell," she admitted. "Dragging me into court. Acting like he was some saint. Maybe he pissed off the wrong person." They asked if she knew anyone who might want him dead. Her expression didn't change. "You think I put a hit on him?" She let out a dry laugh. "I don't have that kind of money." The questioning continued for over an hour. She denied any involvement. No alibi. No emotion. Then, a new name entered the conversation. A man Vanessa had been seeing on and off for nearly a year. Diego Ramirez. Detectives pulled his file. A string of prior arrests, assault, drug possession, intimidation. A man known for solving problems with violence. A man who, according to multiple sources, had made it very clear that Marcus was getting in the way. The next morning, a warrant was issued. Officers tracked Diego to a mechanic shop on the south side of town. He was inside the garage, wiping his hands with a rag, when the officers stormed in. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He simply smirked. But that smirk faded when they found the black sedan, parked behind the shop, partially hidden by a rusted chain-link fence, was a vehicle that matched the description from the courthouse footage. Inside, they found traces of gunpowder residue. A shell casing wedged between the seats. Blood spatter on the steering wheel. The walls were closing in. During interrogation, Diego refused to talk. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes half-lidded. But when detectives mentioned Vanessa, his jaw tightened. "She tell you to come after me?" His voice was low, almost amused. "She always runs her mouth when she's scared." A calculated pause from the detective. Then, a simple question. "What would she be scared of, Diego?" The silence stretched between them. Then, Diego exhaled. A slow, deliberate breath. "You already know," he muttered. "Doesn't matter what I say." But it did matter. And within hours, the entire case took a turn no one expected, because Vanessa Castillo was already gone. When officers returned to question her again, her house was empty. The car was gone. Her phone disconnected. A neighbor claimed she had left with her daughter, carrying nothing but a single duffel bag. The hunt was on. The house was abandoned. A half-finished cup of coffee sat on the kitchen counter. A child's pink backpack lay open on the couch, one strap dangling over the edge as if dropped in haste. The closet doors were left ajar, empty hangers swaying gently from an unseen disturbance. Drawers had been yanked out. Clothes were missing. The bed, unmade. It wasn't just that Vanessa Castillo had left. She had left in a hurry. Detectives knew what this meant. A woman on the run. A mother taking her child. This wasn't just an evasion tactic. This was escape. The kind that required planning, resources, and above all, fear. An emergency alert was issued for Isabella Castillo. Every officer in the city received the bulletin. Her photograph, dark curls framing a bright, innocent face, flashed across television screens. An Amber Alert pinged on phones across the state. Billboards carried her name. The country was watching now, but there was something strange. Vanessa hadn't taken her passport. Her bank accounts remained untouched. She hadn't withdrawn cash. No bus tickets. No flight records. No rideshare history. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, back at the station, Diego Ramirez sat in silence. He had refused a lawyer. He had refused food. He had refused sleep. For hours, detectives pressed him. Again and again, they played the surveillance footage from the courthouse. The black sedan. The shadowed figure stepping out. The first gunshot. The body collapsing. Finally, Diego leaned forward, resting his arms on the cold metal table. He stared at the detectives with an expression that was neither fear nor defiance. "You don't get it, do you?" His voice was quiet, almost amused. "This ain't about me. It never was." A detective slammed a hand on the table. "Then tell us who it's about." Diego smirked. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "You already know." A new lead came in just after midnight. A security camera outside a gas station on the outskirts of town had picked up a vehicle matching Vanessa's. A silver sedan. The timestamp read 10:37 p.m. Vanessa stepped out first, her hair pulled into a tight bun, wearing an oversized hoodie. Then, from the passenger side, Isabella climbed out, her small hand gripping her mother's sleeve. Vanessa hurried inside. Bought a bottle of water. A granola bar. Paid in cash. Outside, Isabella waited. Her little legs swinging over the edge of the curb. Then, the driver stepped out. It wasn't Vanessa. It wasn't Diego. It was a third person. Male. Tall. Baseball cap pulled low. He never looked directly at the camera. He leaned against the car, arms crossed, glancing around. Vanessa handed him the bag of food. He nodded. She ushered Isabella back into the car. And then, gone. The gas station clerk remembered them. Said Vanessa looked nervous, kept glancing at the door. Said the man never spoke. Said the little girl barely made a sound. The detectives replayed the footage again. And again. And again. Then, a breakthrough: a blurred logo on the driver's jacket. Faded. Almost unreadable. A rental company. By 3 a.m., they had a name. Luis Ortega. A former private investigator. A man who once worked cases just like Marcus Alvarez's, custody battles, missing persons, domestic disputes. A man whose license had been revoked 3 years prior for falsifying evidence. A man who, according to records, had been hired by Vanessa Castillo. Detectives traced the rental agreement. The car had been picked up at 6:45 p.m. the night before. Paid for in cash. Signed under an alias, but the handwriting matched Ortega's previous records. They had him. By sunrise, a SWAT team was assembling. The address was a remote house, miles from the city. A place where no one would hear a child cry. No neighbors. No traffic. No way out. They moved in silently. Rifles raised. Shadows shifting under the early morning light. A single bird cried out in the distance, the only sound in an otherwise breathless world. Then, movement inside. A curtain flickered. The order was given. Go. The doors splintered inward. Officers poured in. Flashlights cut through the dark. The air smelled of stale coffee, unwashed clothes, fear. Then, a voice. Small. Trembling. Mommy? A child's whisper from the back room. And then, a gunshot. Point one. Then another, shouts. Commands. A struggle. The sound of a body hitting the floor. And finally, silence. When the dust settled, Vanessa Castillo was in handcuffs, her wrists red from the force of the officer's grip. Luis Ortega lay on the ground, a bullet wound in his leg, his hands clutching at nothing. And in the center of the room, standing barefoot in an oversized t-shirt, Isabella Castillo stared at the scene before her, her small fingers gripping the edge of a wooden chair. She did not cry. She did not move. She simply watched. The case was closed. The killers were caught. The child was safe. But long after the headlines faded, after the trials and the convictions, one question remained. Why had Marcus Alvarez died? Was it love? Jealousy? Power? Or was it something else entirely? A truth buried so deep, so carefully concealed, that even now, after everything, no one could say for certain. The courtroom was packed. Every seat taken. Reporters lined the back walls, their cameras trained on the defendants. The fluorescent lights above cast a harsh glow, illuminating the two people at the center of the case, Vanessa Castillo and Luis Ortega. The trial of the decade, they called it. A crime of passion. A murder fueled by desperation, greed, or something far more complex. The prosecution wasted no time. They painted Marcus Alvarez as a devoted father, a man who had done everything in his power to be in his daughter's life. A man who had been systematically torn down by an ex who could not bear to lose control. And when the courts no longer served her, she turned to something else, she turned to murder. Vanessa sat motionless, her dark eyes fixed on the table in front of her. She barely reacted as the prosecution played the courthouse surveillance footage, the grainy video showing Marcus taking his final steps. She didn't flinch when the medical examiner described each of the 32 bullets that tore through his body. She barely moved when her own daughter was called to the stand. Isabella Castillo, now 7 years old, had been placed in protective custody after her mother's arrest. She was living with Marcus's mother, a woman who had once feared she would never see her granddaughter again. The courtroom fell silent as Isabella took her seat. She was small, almost swallowed by the wooden chair. Her feet didn't quite touch the floor. She stared at her hands, fingers twisting in her lap. The prosecutor approached gently. His voice was soft. Careful. Isabella, he said, kneeling slightly to be at her eye level. Can you tell us about the night your mommy took you away? A long pause. The little girl's lower lip quivered. We left really fast, she finally whispered. She told me we were going on an adventure. Did she tell you why? A shake of the head. Did she seem scared? Another pause. Then, a nod. And what about the man? The man in the car. Luis Ortega. For the first time, Isabella hesitated. Her fingers curled into her shirt. He was mean, she said finally. Mean how, sweetheart? The little girl glanced at her mother, who still hadn't moved. He yelled a lot, she murmured. And he told mommy what to do. For the first time, Vanessa's expression shifted. A flicker of something unreadable. The prosecutor pressed on. Did he ever talk about your daddy? Isabella's throat moved as she swallowed hard. Then, her voice barely above a whisper, he said he was glad daddy was gone. The words hung in the air, heavy, unshakable. Vanessa exhaled sharply, the first real sign of emotion she had shown since her arrest. Her fingers dug into her wrists, as if holding herself together. The prosecutor turned to the jury. Marcus Alvarez was not just murdered, he said, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom. He was executed. And the people responsible are sitting right there. The defense scrambled to counter. They painted Vanessa as a woman trapped, manipulated by a man far more dangerous than she ever realized. Luis Ortega, they claimed, was the mastermind. The enforcer. The one who pulled the strings. But there was one problem. Luis Ortega wasn't talking. He sat in his chair, expression unreadable, arms crossed over his chest. When his attorney whispered to him, he barely reacted. When the prosecution laid out their evidence, he blinked but didn't flinch. When Isabella spoke his name, he smirked. It was only when the jury returned with a verdict that he finally showed any sign of emotion. Vanessa Castillo, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Sentenced to life without parole. Luis Ortega, guilty of first-degree murder. Sentenced to death. Vanessa sobbed for the first time as they led her away, but not for Marcus. Not for herself. She only looked at Isabella, whose small face remained heartbreakingly still. But even as the case officially closed, there was one thing that had never been answered: who had truly ordered the hit? Was it Vanessa, desperate to keep her daughter? Was it Ortega, settling an old debt, exacting revenge for something the courts would never understand? Or was there someone else entirely? Because deep in the stacks of evidence, buried beneath the witness testimonies and security footage, there was a detail the prosecution had overlooked. A bank transfer. Large. Unexplained. Sent from an anonymous account to Luis Ortega just weeks before the murder. A transfer that didn't come from Vanessa Castillo. A transfer that was still untraced. And somewhere, miles away from the courtroom, someone was watching. Listening. Waiting. Because Marcus Alvarez's murder had been solved. Or so the world believed. The trial had ended. The sentences were handed down. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But those who had spent years unraveling Marcus Alvarez's murder knew something wasn't right. Too many loose ends. Too many unanswered questions. The anonymous bank transfer sat in the case files like a ghost, whispering of a truth no one had yet uncovered. Detective Samuel Grayson couldn't let it go. For 2 years, he had been the lead investigator on the case. He had followed every lead, studied every piece of evidence, sat through every grueling testimony. But the deeper he had looked, the more something gnawed at him. Luis Ortega was a killer, no doubt about that. He had the gun, the getaway car, the history of violence. Vanessa Castillo had motive, an obvious reason to want Marcus out of the picture, but neither of them had the money. Vanessa was drowning in debt. Her credit cards were maxed out, her bank accounts barely holding enough to pay for gas and groceries. Luis Ortega had a history of small-time scams, but nothing close to the kind of financial movement found in that anonymous wire transfer. Someone else had paid for Marcus Alvarez's execution. And that meant someone else was still out there. Grayson sat in his office long after the station had emptied for the night. The case file lay open before him, its pages worn from too many hands flipping through them. The transfer had been routed through multiple offshore accounts, each layer obscuring the sender's true identity. He picked up his phone. There was only one person who might have the answers. A dial tone. A pause. Then, a voice, low, cautious. "Yeah. I need to talk," Grayson said. "About Ortega." A sigh on the other end. "You're still chasing ghosts, detective." "Someone paid him," Grayson pressed. "Vanessa didn't have the money." "He sure as hell didn't." "That means we missed something." A pause. Then, the voice softened. "Meet me in an hour. Same spot as before." The line went dead. Grayson leaned back in his chair. The same spot as before meant the diner off of 8th Street. A place where voices blended into the clatter of silverware and the hiss of the coffee machine. A place where no one would pay attention to two men in the back booth, speaking in hushed tones. An hour later, Grayson slid into the booth across from Richard Vasquez, a former FBI financial crimes analyst who had worked cases just like this one before resigning under mysterious circumstances. Vasquez sipped his coffee, his fingers drumming lightly against the ceramic cup. "I looked into the transfer," he said, getting straight to the point. "Whoever wired that money, they knew what they were doing. Offshore accounts, crypto conversions, multiple shell companies. But..." Grayson narrowed his eyes. "But..." Vasquez set the coffee down. "There was a withdrawal. A physical cash withdrawal from one of the accounts before the money made it to Ortega. Grayson felt a chill creep down his spine. Where? Vasquez slid a piece of paper across the table. A bank in Houston. 3 weeks before Marcus was killed. And the name on the withdrawal slip? He tapped the paper twice. Grayson read it. His breath caught in his throat. Eduardo Castillo. Vanessa's brother. A man with no previous ties to the investigation. A man who had never once been questioned. A man whose name had never appeared in any testimony, any court document, any file related to the case. Until now. Grayson exhaled slowly. Where is he now? Vasquez's expression darkened. That's the problem. He disappeared a month after Vanessa's arrest. No phone records, no social security activity. Just, gone. The waitress refilled their coffee, oblivious to the shift in the conversation. Grayson's mind was already racing. Eduardo Castillo had money. He had resources. And he had disappeared. That wasn't a coincidence. Back at the precinct, Grayson pulled Eduardo's file. What little information they had painted a picture of a man who had stayed off the radar. No criminal record. No notable business dealings. He had owned a small construction company, but it shut down the same year Marcus was killed, but then Grayson saw something that made his stomach drop. Eduardo had been in court the day Marcus was murdered. A witness statement, long buried in the original case file, placed him outside the courthouse at 9:30 a.m. 12 minutes before the shooting. The implications hit Grayson like a freight train. Eduardo Castillo had been there. He had been watching. And if he had wired the money to Ortega, that meant only one thing. He had ordered the hit. Grayson didn't sleep that night. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still one thing missing. Motive. Why would Eduardo Castillo want Marcus Alvarez dead? The answer came 2 days later, when Grayson tracked down an old friend of Eduardo's, Miguel Torres, a former employee at his construction company. The man had been hesitant to talk at first, but when Grayson pushed, the truth spilled out. Eduardo hated Marcus, Miguel admitted. Thought he was weak. Thought he was a problem. Why? Grayson demanded. Miguel hesitated. Then, because Marcus knew something. Something he wasn't supposed to know. Grayson felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. What did he know? Miguel looked around, as if making sure no one else could hear. Then, he leaned in close. The business was a front, he whispered. Eduardo was moving money. Big money. Marcus found out. And he wasn't gonna keep quiet. Grayson stared at him, his pulse pounding in his ears. This wasn't just about custody. This wasn't just about a jealous ex. Marcus Alvarez had uncovered something much bigger. And for that, he had been silenced. The next morning, an arrest warrant was issued, but when officers arrived at the last known address tied to Eduardo Castillo, they found nothing. The apartment was empty. No signs of recent activity. No personal belongings, only a single sheet of paper left on the kitchen counter. A note, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Too late, detective. Eduardo Castillo was gone, and the hunt for the real mastermind had only just begun. The case was supposed to be closed. The trial had ended, the guilty were sentenced, and Marcus Alvarez's name was buried beneath legal documents and news reports. But somewhere out there, Eduardo Castillo was still walking free. He had orchestrated a murder. He had vanished without a trace. And now, he was watching. Waiting. What do you think really happened? Was Vanessa just a pawn in a larger game? Did Luis Ortega take the fall for something even bigger? And most importantly, where is Eduardo Castillo now? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you have a theory, if you've noticed something no one else has, we want to hear from you. Make sure to like this video if you want more cases like this, and don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates on the world's most chilling true crime mysteries, because the story of Marcus Alvarez isn't over, and the real mastermind is still out there.